October 23, 1947, 11:45 p.m. Billie Holiday was removing her makeup in Cotton Club's dressing room when she heard a gunshot from outside, and her heart stopped. What had been a perfect night until that moment suddenly turned into a nightmare. When Lady Day cracked the door open and looked out, she saw the club's secret partner, Vincent Torrino, lying in a pool of blood on the floor. But what was truly shocking wasn't the identity of the killers. Billie knew them, and they had noticed that Lady Day had seen everything. That night, Billie Holiday didn't just witness a murder, she also became the keeper of a secret that would haunt her for the rest of her life. If you want to discover all the shocking details of this story, please subscribe and turn on notifications, because the truth hidden behind Cotton Club's bloody night was the beginning of a nightmare that lasted until Billie Holiday's death. The evening of October 23, 1947, everything at Cotton Club was proceeding as usual. The jazz queen Billie Holiday was about to take the stage at Harlem's most prestigious entertainment venue, and the salon was packed. Lady Day was particularly informed that night because she was promoting her new album, Songs for Distinct Lovers. Among the audience were music critics, wealthy businessmen, and of course important figures from New York's underworld. Cotton Club had never been a clean place, but the atmosphere that night seemed more tense than usual. Vincent Torrino was one of the club's silent partners and usually stayed in the background. The 45-year-old Italian-American businessman officially worked as an entertainment consultant, but his real job was much more complex. Torrino was the person who coordinated Cotton Club's mafia connections and ensured the club ran smoothly. That night, however, Vinny was there on a very different mission. He was trying to save his life. When Billie Holiday took the stage at 10:30 p.m., her performance was scheduled to last an hour as planned. Lady Day was performing classics like Lover Man, God Bless the Child, and of course Strange Fruit. The audience was mesmerized because Billie's voice was particularly emotional and powerful that night. However, a very different drama was unfolding backstage. Vincent Torrino was talking with two men in the club's main corridor, and this conversation was getting increasingly heated. Cotton Club's ownership structure was extremely complex. The official owner was Herman Stark, but real power was controlled by several mafia families. The Genovese family, Lucchese family, and Gambino family all took shares from Cotton Club, and this sharing constantly created tension. Torrino played a critical role in this complex balance because he was both in contact with the FBI and had gained the trust of the mafia families. However, this double game had become very risky. The real reason Vincent Torrino's life was in danger was his secret agreement with the FBI. In 1946, Torrino had been arrested for tax evasion but was released after making a deal with federal agents. According to this agreement, Vinny would provide regular information to the FBI about mafia activities at Cotton Club. In return, he would both maintain his freedom and be under FBI protection. However, this protection wasn't as strong as he thought. In October 1947, Torrino had obtained critical documents showing that mafia families were using Cotton Club as a money laundering center. These documents showed that behind the club's legal-looking income, millions of dollars in dirty money was being laundered. More importantly, these documents contained the real names and bank account information of mafia leaders. Vinny was about to give this information to the FBI, but his plan had spread by word of mouth. Torrino's biggest mistake was agreeing to meet FBI agent Daniel Morrison at Cotton Club. Morrison was going to collect the documents from Vinny that night, and Torrino thought this would be his last cooperation. However, the mafia had learned about this meeting because Morrison's phones were being tapped. Cotton Club's security chief Mario Benedetti was actually a Genovese family man and had long suspected Torrino's cooperation with the FBI. That night at 11:30 p.m., as Billie Holiday's performance was about to end, Vincent Torrino made his final mistake. He went to the club's back corridor to meet FBI agent Morrison. Vinny was carrying the critical documents with him and thought he would finally be free. However, instead of Morrison, Mario Benedetti and two armed men were waiting in the corridor. Torrino's fate was sealed at that moment. When Billie Holiday finished her performance, she left the stage amid applause and headed straight to her dressing room. Lady Day's dressing room was in a strategic location overlooking Cotton Club's back corridor, and from here Billie occasionally noticed the club's unofficial activities. That night, however, she would witness much more. When she entered the dressing room, Billie heard male voices talking loudly in the corridor. Initially, this seemed normal because various business meetings were held throughout the night at Cotton Club. However, the voices were becoming increasingly tense and threatening. When Lady Day decided to crack the door open and look out, she didn't know she was about to witness the most shocking moment of her life. In the corridor, Vincent Torrino was face to face with Mario Benedetti and two armed men. Vinny was holding a file and trying to explain something to Benedetti. "This is just an insurance policy, Mario. I don't want to hurt anyone," Billy could hear him saying. However, Benedetti's facial expression wasn't forgiving. "Vinny, you're too late. You played with FBI dogs and now you'll pay the price," he replied. As Billie Holiday continued watching through the door crack, she understood how serious the situation was. Torrino's hands were shaking and he was sweating. Benedetti, however, maintained his composure and acted as if he were conducting a routine business meeting. The two armed men had surrounded Torrino, leaving no escape route. Lady Day was scared but couldn't look away because this scene had a hypnotic effect. Suddenly, Benedetti stepped toward Torrino and signaled to one of his men. At that moment, Billie Holiday's blood ran cold because she could understand what was about to happen. Vinny pleaded one last time, "Please, Mario, think about my family," but Benedetti just shook his head. "Don't worry about your family, Vinny. They'll be safe, as long as you're not around." After these words, a gunshot echoed, and Vincent Torrino collapsed to the floor. What shocked Billie Holiday the most wasn't the murder itself, but the identity of the killers. Mario Benedetti was Cotton Club's security chief, and Lady Day had known him for years. Benedetti was a man who appeared kind, polite, and trustworthy. He even always treated Billie respectfully and addressed her as Madam Holiday. But now Lady Day was seeing Benedetti's true face. He was a cold-blooded killer. The other two armed men were also Cotton Club security personnel. Tony Russo and Frank Moretti worked as the club's protection officers, but in reality, they were mafia hitmen. Billie knew them too because these men provided stage security during her performances. What was most traumatic for Lady Day was learning that the people who protected her every night were actually killers. Benedetti looked at Torrino's body and gave instructions to his men: "Search every part of the body and find that file. Every document he shared with the FBI must fall into our hands." Russo and Moretti thoroughly searched Vinny's corpse and finally found the file they were looking for. After Benedetti looked through the file, he seemed satisfied. "Good job, boys. Now it's cleanup time." Meanwhile, Billie Holiday continued to watch everything through the door crack. Lady Day's heart was beating so fast that she was afraid Benedetti might hear it. However, the terrible truth was different. Benedetti already knew Billie was there, because Cotton Club's security chief kept every corner of the club under control, and he had noticed that Lady Day's dressing room door was ajar. Benedetti slowly turned toward where Billie was located, and his eyes found the door crack directly. When Lady Day and he made eye contact, Billie's soul went to hell. Benedetti smiled and put his finger to his lips, making a silence gesture. Then he began to approach. At that moment, Billie Holiday realized that she hadn't just witnessed a murder, she had also become a target herself. When Mario Benedetti approached Billie Holiday's dressing room door, Lady Day didn't know what to do. If she tried to run, she would obviously be caught, because the club's exits were under control. If she tried to scream, she would be silenced immediately. Billie's only option was to try to appear as calm as possible. Lady Day opened the door completely and looked into Benedetti's eyes. "Madam Holiday, you've worked late into the night," said Benedetti, as if having a normal conversation. Billie couldn't speak but nodded. "Your stage performance was wonderful, especially Strange Fruit. That song is really touching." Benedetti's tone was so normal that it took Billie several seconds to grasp the reality. This man had just killed someone and was now talking to her about music. "Mario," Billie could whisper, but Benedetti put his finger to his lips. "Pshaw, Madam Holiday, you must be very tired tonight. Maybe it would be better if you went home right away." Benedetti's message was clear. She needed to forget what she saw and stay quiet. Lady Day nodded because she had no other choice. "By the way, Madam Holiday, there will be interesting news in tomorrow's newspaper headlines. It will say that Vincent Torrino had a heart attack. Poor man, he was working too hard." Benedetti's words showed Billie how detailed his plan was. The murder would be covered up, and Torrino's death would be attributed to natural causes. "I hope you share the same opinion, Madam Holiday." At that moment, Billie Holiday made the most critical decision of her life. "Yes, Mario, Vinny really looked very tired lately. A heart attack isn't surprising at all." As she said these words, Lady Day's heart was breaking because she was protecting Torrino's killer. However, she had no other choice to survive. Benedetti smiled with satisfaction and said, "You're a very smart woman, Madam Holiday. This intelligence of yours will bring you a long life." After Billie Holiday left her dressing room and departed Cotton Club, Mario Benedetti and his team quickly began the cleanup operation. Vincent Torrino's body was quietly removed from the club's back exit and taken to the morgue in a pre-prepared car. Special precautions had been taken to make the corpse appear as if it had suffered a heart attack, and the autopsy process was under control. The blood traces in Cotton Club's corridor were professionally cleaned, leaving no evidence. Benedetti was very experienced in such operations because Cotton Club had previously been the scene of mafia settlements. Maintaining the club's clean appearance was the most critical part of the job because Cotton Club's prestige was very valuable to the mafia. The most important detail was eliminating Vincent's connection with the FBI. Correspondence with FBI agent Morrison was found among Vincent's personal belongings and destroyed. Additionally, during the search of Torrino's home, all documents relating to cooperation with the FBI were seized. These documents would become leverage for the mafia against the FBI. Benedetti's biggest concern, however, was Billie Holiday. It was uncertain whether Lady Day would talk about what she saw. Benedetti knew Billie was a smart woman, but he also didn't forget that she was someone who sang bold songs like Strange Fruit. If Lady Day felt moral responsibility and decided to speak, both Benedetti and the entire mafia family would be in danger. For this reason, Benedetti began closely monitoring Billie Holiday. Lady Day's phone conversations would be listened to, the places she went would be tracked, and the people she talked to would be identified. If Billie took even the slightest step toward going to the FBI, immediate action would be taken. In Benedetti's plan, Billie Holiday now had controlled witness status. After leaving Cotton Club, the first thing Billie Holiday did was go straight home. Lady Day couldn't sleep that night because what she had seen wouldn't leave her mind. Vincent Torrino's blood-soaked corpse, Mario Benedetti's cold expression, and most importantly, her own silence bothered her. Billie had witnessed a murder and hadn't reported it. The next morning, newspapers announced as expected that Vincent Torrino had died due to sudden heart attack. The news contained condolence messages about Cotton Club's valuable partner's loss. Torrino was remembered as a hard-working and honest businessman. When Billie read these news reports, she felt nauseous because only she knew the truth. Lady Day's psychological condition was gradually worsening. Benedetti's words, "You're a very smart woman," were ringing in her ears, and she knew these words were meant as a threat. Billie now constantly felt like she was being followed. When coming home, when walking on the street, even when shopping, she had the feeling that someone was watching her. Worst of all, Billie had to continue her performances at Cotton Club, because suddenly leaving the club could arouse suspicion. Lady Day sang next to the killers every night, listened to Benedetti's perfect performance, Madame Holiday compliments, and acted as if nothing had happened. This hypocrisy was eating away at Billie's soul. As weeks passed, Lady Day's behavior began to change. Billie, who used to be social and talkative, became introverted and suspicious. Her friends noticed this change but couldn't understand the reason. "Billie isn't like she used to be. She constantly looks tense and scared," they would say. However, Lady Day couldn't tell anyone the truth because her life was in danger. On the night Vincent Torrino was killed, FBI agent Daniel Morrison had an appointment to meet Vinnie at Cotton Club. Morrison had come to collect critical documents, but Torrino never showed up. The agent waited until morning hours and then began to worry. When he heard the news of Torrino's death the next day, he understood the seriousness of the situation. Morrison thought Torrino's death was suspicious because Vinnie was going to give him very important documents that night. These documents would expose money laundering operations at Cotton Club and could deal a major blow to mafia families. However, now both Torrino was dead and the documents were missing. Morrison's 2 years of work had gone to waste. When the FBI agent reported the situation to his superiors, an investigation was requested. However, Cotton Club's political connections were very strong, and the investigation was closed due to insufficient evidence. Torrino's death was officially accepted as having occurred from natural causes, and the file was archived. Morrison was uncomfortable with this decision, but the FBI's upper management was determined to close the matter. Actually, there were also mafia connections within the FBI, and the Cotton Club operation had become too dangerous for some federal agents. If Torrino's murder came to light, the FBI's complex relationships with the mafia could also come to the agenda. For this reason, the in-depth investigation Morrison requested was rejected, and the agent was transferred to another assignment. If someone had seen Torrino being killed, this person could be very valuable for both the FBI and himself. However, no one was coming forward, and the mafia wasn't giving any clues about the existence of any witness. What Morrison didn't know was that this witness was Billie Holiday, and Lady Day had been forced into silence. Mario Benedetti established a professional surveillance network to keep Billie Holiday under control. Lady Day's phone line was tapped, her house was being watched, and every place she went was being recorded. Benedetti's goal was to learn whether Billie was going to the FBI. If Lady Day decided to talk, Benedetti wanted to know this beforehand and take precautions. The surveillance operation was extremely detailed. Billie's house cleaner was a spy cooperating with the mafia. Lady Day's personal letters, diaries, and even her trash were systematically examined. Information was also being gathered about Billie's friends and colleagues, researching which ones might have FBI connections. During her performances at Cotton Club, Benedetti closely observed Billie. Whether there were changes in Lady Day's stage performance, whether there were hidden messages in song lyrics, and her interaction with the audience were analyzed. Benedetti paid special attention to the Strange Fruit song because this song had social protest meaning, and Billie could use it as a murder metaphor. The most sinister detail was the manipulation of Billie's health condition. Lady Day's doctor was someone connected to the mafia, and the medicines given to Billie were aimed at keeping her calm. These drugs affected Lady Day's psychological state, reducing her desire to talk about the murder. Billie wasn't aware of this manipulation but had begun to feel constantly tired and drowsy. Benedetti's biggest fear was that Billie would interpret the Strange Fruit song as a protest about the murder. If Lady Day began giving hidden messages during her stage performances, this could attract the attention of both the FBI and the media. For this reason, Benedetti also began controlling Billie's repertoire and had dangerous songs removed from the program. After Vincent Torrino's death, his family also became a target of the mafia. Vinny's wife Maria Torrino and their 2 children were taken under protection. However, this protection actually meant control because the family were relatives of someone who had cooperated with the FBI. The mafia wanted to know whether the Torrino family was also providing information to the FBI. Maria Torrino didn't know her husband's real job. Vincent had only told his wife that he was doing business consulting at Cotton Club. Maria wasn't suspicious about her husband's sudden death because Vinny really had looked very stressed and tired in recent days. However, while going through her husband's personal belongings, she found correspondence with the FBI. This discovery was shocking for Maria because she learned that her husband had been playing a double game between the mafia and FBI. Maria thought about taking these documents to the police, but Benedetti's men had warned her beforehand. "Madame Torrino, let's show respect for your husband's memory. Some secrets should be buried in the grave," they had said. The message was clear. If she didn't stay quiet, she could share the same fate. Torrino's children were also affected by this tension. 16-year-old son Anthony and 14-year-old daughter Sophia felt the suddenly changed atmosphere after their father's death. The house was constantly under protection, but these protectors were more like prison guards. The children couldn't even go to school as freely as before. Most tragically, Maria Torrino tried to reach Billie Holiday. Maria knew her husband worked at Cotton Club and thought maybe Lady Day might have information about Vincent's last days. However, Benedetti prevented this communication and told Maria, "Madame Holiday is in a very traumatic state, let's not disturb her." Actually, Benedetti was afraid of the 2 women meeting and talking. Months after the Cotton Club murder, Billie Holiday was experiencing constant internal conflict. On one hand, there was her moral responsibility to expose Vincent Torrino's killer. On the other hand, there was her survival instinct. Lady Day asked herself the same question every night before sleeping. What was the right thing to do? Billie's biggest dilemma was the Torrino family. Vincent's wife and children believed their husband-father had suffered a heart attack. If Billie revealed the truth, this family would both learn the truth and become a target of the mafia. Lady Day chose to remain silent, thinking about the family's safety. However, this silence was damaging Billie's mental health. Lady Day was constantly having nightmares. Vincent Torrino's blood-soaked corpse, Benedetti's cold smile, and her own cowardice. These nightmares were so realistic that Billie would wake up screaming in the middle of the night. Her neighbors had begun to wonder about Lady Day's psychological condition. This trauma was also reflected in Billie's music. When singing Strange Fruit, she now thought not only of racist lynching but also of the murder at Cotton Club. The lines "blood on the leaves" had taken on a much more personal meaning for Lady Day. Audiences appreciated this emotional intensity but didn't know the reason. The most painful moments were when she encountered Benedetti. Mario continued to protect Billie at Cotton Club every evening and was extremely polite to Lady Day. "Madame Holiday, you were wonderful again tonight." He would compliment and smile as if nothing had happened. This hypocrisy made Billie's stomach turn, but she couldn't react. After the failure of the Vincent Torrino operation, Agent Daniel Morrison developed a different strategy. Instead of fighting the mafia directly, He focused on gathering information through indirect means. Morrison had one question on his mind. Was there another witness at Cotton Club that night? If there was, he had to find this person. Morrison obtained the personnel list of Cotton Club from that night and began investigating everyone one by one. Waiters, musicians, security guards, and of course Billie Holiday. He knew Lady Day was at the club that night, but approaching Billie directly could be very risky. If the mafia learned this, both Billie and Morrison could be in danger. Instead, Morrison began observing Billie Holiday through indirect means. Lady Day's behavioral changes, differences in her performance style, and changes in her social circle were analyzed. Morrison noticed that Billie had gone through a dramatic psychological change after the Cotton Club murder. This strengthened the possibility that Lady Day was a witness. Morrison's plan was to approach Billie Holiday in a safe environment. Lady Day needed to be convinced to cooperate with the FBI, but this process had to be conducted very carefully. If the mafia noticed this approach, both Billie and Morrison's lives would be in danger. The FBI agent decided to be patient and began waiting for the right opportunity. The most important detail was ensuring Billie Holiday's safety. If Lady Day decided to cooperate with the FBI, she would need to be protected from the mafia. Morrison discussed this matter with his superiors and requested the creation of a special protection program for Billie. However, the FBI's upper management was reluctant to allocate more resources to the Cotton Club operation. After Vincent Torrino's murder, tensions among mafia families increased. While the Genovese family thought Benedetti had handled the job cleanly, the Lucchese family argued that the operation was too risky. Committing murder at Cotton Club could damage the club's prestige and attract federal attention. Lucchese family leader Thomas Lucchese tried to question Benedetti. "Mario, were there really no witnesses that night? Is it possible that no one saw anything in a place like Cotton Club?" he asked. Benedetti tried to appear confident but was actually troubled by the Billie Holiday concern. If Lady Day decided to talk, not only Benedetti but the entire mafia structure could be in danger. The Gambino family was considering withdrawing from Cotton Club operations. The club becoming hot bothered them, and they were looking for safer investment areas. This situation could affect Cotton Club's revenue structure and cause new conflicts among mafia families. Benedetti's biggest problem was convincing his superiors. Mario was saying the situation was under control, but in reality he wasn't sure what Billie Holiday would do. Lady Day's psychological condition was unstable, and she could decide to talk at any moment. Benedetti began applying tighter control against Billie to minimize this risk. The most critical development was the FBI's increased activity around Cotton Club. Morrison and his team had begun to be seen more frequently around the club, and this situation was making mafia leaders nervous. If the FBI was planning a new operation, Benedetti's efforts to hide the Torrino murder could be in vain. In the spring of 1948, Billie Holiday reached her psychological breaking point. 6 months had passed since the Cotton Club murder, but the trauma's effect wasn't diminishing. Lady Day was constantly having nightmares, experiencing panic attacks and showing signs of depression. But worst of all, she couldn't tell anyone the truth. Carmen McRae, Billie's closest friend, was worried about Lady Day's condition. "Billie, you're not like you used to be. You constantly look scared and tense. What happened to you?" she would ask. However, Billie couldn't tell Carmen the truth because she didn't want to put her friend in danger either. Lady Day's performances were also affected by this condition. During her shows at Cotton Club, Billie would occasionally freeze, act as if she had forgotten in the middle of songs, and even have to leave the stage. Audiences attributed this to Lady Day's artistic temperament, but the reality was much darker. The most traumatic moment was when Billie visited Vincent Torrino's grave. Lady Day secretly went to the cemetery and cried in front of Vinny's headstone. "I'm sorry, Vincent, I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry I couldn't tell the truth," she whispered. This visit brought Billie some relief, but also increased her guilt. Benedetti's espionage network detected Billie's cemetery visit, and Mario became very worried. If Lady Day had met with FBI agents at the cemetery, he thought the situation could get out of control. Benedetti decided it was time to take tighter measures against Billie. In the summer of 1948, FBI agent Daniel Morrison finally decided to approach Billie Holiday. Morrison's plan was to arrange a coincidental meeting with Lady Day and try to gain her trust. However, this approach would be extremely risky because the mafia was constantly watching Billie. Morrison planned to encounter her at a jazz club Billie frequently visited. He would approach Lady Day after a concert at Apollo Theater and try to gain her trust by talking about music. Morrison would introduce himself as a music critic and try to befriend Billie. The first phase of the plan was successful. Morrison met Billie at Apollo Theater and had a long conversation about music. Lady Day found Morrison likable and understanding because the agent was genuinely knowledgeable about jazz music. Morrison praised the social impact of the Strange Fruit song and said he admired Billie's courage. However, during the second meeting, Benedetti's men noticed Morrison. The FBI agent's identity was detected by the mafia, and the situation became very dangerous. Benedetti took action to prevent Morrison from approaching Billie Holiday. However, directly attacking an FBI agent would be too risky, so he developed alternative plans. When Morrison realized the situation had been noticed, he suspended the operation. Billie Holiday's safety had been compromised, and the FBI agent had to protect Lady Day. Morrison reported the situation to his superiors and requested emergency protection for Billie. However, it was too late because the mafia was preparing to take action. When Mario Benedetti learned that FBI agent Morrison had approached Billie Holiday, he became very angry. This situation showed that Lady Day was ready to cooperate with the FBI. Benedetti decided it was time to give Billie one final warning. This time there was no politeness, only naked threat. Benedetti waited for Billie Holiday in her dressing room at Cotton Club after her performance. When Lady Day entered the room and saw Mario, she was scared because Benedetti's facial expression was harsher and more threatening than ever. "Madam Holiday, we need to have an important conversation," said Benedetti, locking the door behind him. "I hear you've been meeting interesting people lately. Music critics, federal employees. You've become very social," said Benedetti, not taking his eyes off Billie's. Lady Day's heart was racing because she understood that Benedetti knew about Morrison. "Mario, I was just," she began, but Benedetti cut her off. "Show, Madam Holiday, listen to me very carefully. If you're thinking about talking about what you saw that night, you need to know some things before you do that." Benedetti took out a photograph from the table and showed it to Billie. The photo showed Lady Day's sister Sadie. "Your beautiful sister, isn't she? She lives a very quiet life in Philadelphia." Billie's blood ran cold. Benedetti wasn't only threatening her but also her family. "Also, your mother is in Baltimore. The old woman, her health isn't very good. It wouldn't be good for her to experience new traumas at this age," Mario continued. The message was very clear. If Billie talked, her family would be harmed. "Do you understand, Madam Holiday? Some secrets are very heavy. This weight can crush people who can't carry it. Vincent's story ends here. Period." Benedetti took back the photograph and headed for the door. "Oh, and Madam Holiday, that music critic friend of yours is a very curious person. Curious people can sometimes find themselves in dangerous places." After Mario Benedetti's threat, Billie Holiday made the most difficult decision of her life. Her family's safety was more important than Vincent Torrino's injustice. Lady Day completely cut off her contact with FBI agent Morrison and decided to keep the fact that she witnessed the murder as a secret forever. This decision completely destroyed Billie's soul, but she had no other choice. Lady Day called her sister Sadie and sent her out of town under the pretext of an emergency vacation. She also took her mother from Baltimore and placed her in a safe location. After Billie ensured her family was safe, she accepted her own fate, silence. Morrison's approach attempts continued, but Billie now avoided the FBI agent. Lady Day would change direction when she saw Morrison and was careful not to talk to him. This behavior showed Morrison that Billie was being threatened by the mafia, but the FBI agent couldn't intervene. During her performances at Cotton Club, Billie tried not to make eye contact with Benedetti. Lady Day's stage energy had diminished, and her songs were no longer at their former emotional strength. Audiences noticed this change but couldn't understand the reason. Billie Holiday's vocal cords were the same, but her spirit was broken. The most painful moment was when Billie visited Vincent Torrino's grave for the last time. Lady Day whispered at the graveside, "I'll never forget you, Vincent, but I can't speak. My family is more important than you." This farewell was a goodbye to both Torrino and her own conscience. That day, Billie Holiday decided to become the last witness to the Cotton Club murder. Between 1949 to 1959, Billie Holiday continued to carry the secret of the Cotton Club murder. This 10-year silence gradually damaged Lady Day's mental health more and more. Billie began using alcohol and drugs because these substances reduced the trauma's pain. However, addiction was creating new problems. Lady Day's career also declined during this period. The trauma of the Cotton Club murder negatively affected Billie's artistic performance. Her old energy and passion had diminished. Her songs were no longer as powerful as before because the fire inside her was beginning to die out. Critics began writing, "Billie Holiday is no longer like she used to be." Most tragically, there were moments when Billie wanted to talk about the Vincent Torrino murder. Especially when under the influence of alcohol, Lady Day felt the desire to share this secret. However, thanks to Benedetti's agent network, these attempts to speak were immediately detected and prevented. Billie was constantly being watched and controlled. In the 1950s, the mafia structure changed, but Benedetti's position at Cotton Club strengthened. Mario had now become the club's general manager, and his control over Billie Holiday had increased even more. He continued to monitor Lady Day's every move and immediately suppressed any signs of rebellion. Until Billie Holiday's death in 1959, the Cotton Club murder secret was protected. Lady Day didn't speak about this even on her deathbed because her family's safety was still in danger. Benedetti was even present at Billie's funeral and gave a statement saying, "We lost our valuable artist." The greatest irony was the killer giving a eulogy at the victim's funeral. Vincent Torrino's murder was never solved and remained as heart attack in official records. Mario Benedetti died of natural causes in the 1970s and took his secret to the grave. Tony Russo and Frank Moretti were also never caught. The Cotton Club murder became one of history's lost injustices. Morrison's reports are still available in FBI archives, but there's no definitive evidence that Billie Holiday was a witness. Morrison retired in the 1960s, and the failure of the Cotton Club operation remained a black mark on his career. The agent believed until his death that Billie had witnessed the murder but couldn't prove it. The Torrino family never learned the truth. Maria Torrino died in the 1980s believing her husband had suffered a heart attack. Their children Anthony and Sophia lived their lives thinking their father had died from natural causes. The family never learned about Vincent's mafia connections and FBI cooperation. Cotton Club closed in the 1960s, and different businesses opened in its place. The club's old corridors are still standing, but where Vincent Torrino's blood flowed is now a restaurant. Customers eat their meals, unaware of any trace of the murder committed beneath their feet. The fact that Billie Holiday witnessed the Cotton Club murder doesn't appear in history books. Lady Day's biographers don't mention this event because there's no evidence. However, Billie's psychological collapse and performance changes after 1947 were the results of this hidden trauma. Cotton Club's bloody night remained one of music history's lost pages.